Hi, folks, and welcome to First Bite, Fed, Fun, and Functional, a speech therapy podcast sponsored by SpeechTherapyPD.com. I am your host on this nerd venture, Michelle Dawson, MS, CCC, SLP, CLC, the All Things Peds SLP. I am a colleague in the trenches of home health early intervention right there with you. I run my own private practice, Heartwood Speech Therapy, here in Culvertown, South Carolina, and I guest lecture nationwide on best practices for early intervention for the medically complex and fragile child. First Bite's mission is short and sweet, to bring light, hope, knowledge, and joy to the pediatric clinician, parent, or advocate.
By way of a nerdy conversation, so there's plenty of laughter too.
In this podcast, we cover everything from AAC to breastfeeding,
ethics on how to run a private practice,
pediatric dysphagia to clinical supervision,
and all other topics in the world of pediatric speech pathology. Our goal is to bring evidence-based practice straight to you by interviewing subject matter experts,
to break down the communication barriers so that we can access the knowledge of their fields.
Or, as a close friend says, to build the bridge.
By bringing other professionals and experts in our field together, we hope to spark advocacy, joy, and passion for continuing to grow and advance care for our little ones.
Every fourth episode, I join in. I'm Erin Forward, MSP, CCC, SLP, the Yankee by way of Rochester, New York transplant who actually inspired this journey. I bring a different perspective, that of a newish clinician with experience in early intervention, pediatric acute care, and nonprofit pediatric outpatient settings.
So sit back, relax, and watch out for all our squirrels and enjoy this geeky gig brought to you by SpeechTherapyPD.com. Hey, this is Michelle Dawson, and I need to update my disclosure statements. So my non-financial disclosures. I actively volunteer with Feeding Matters, National Foundation of Swallowing Disorders, NFOSD, Dysphagia Outreach Project, DOP. I am a former treasurer with the Council of State Association Presidents, CSAP, a past president of the South Carolina Speech, Language, and Hearing Association, SCISHA, a current Board of Trustees member with the Communication Disorders Foundation of Virginia, and I am a current member of ASHA SIG 13, SCISHA, the Speech Language Hearing Association of Virginia, SHAV, a member of the National Black Speech Language Hearing Association in Basel, and Dysphagia Research Society, DRS. My financial disclosures include receiving compensation for First Bite podcast from SpeechTherapyPD.com, as well as from additional webinars and for webinars associated with Understanding Dysphagia, which is also a podcast with SpeechTherapyPD.com. And I currently receive a salary from the University of South Carolina in my work as adjunct professor and student services coordinator. And I receive royalties from the sale of my book, Chasing the Swallow: Truth, Science, and Hope for Pediatric Feeding and Swallowing Disorders, as well as compensation for the CEUs associated with it from SpeechTherapyPD.com. So those are my current disclosure statements. Thanks, guys.
Hi, this is Erin Forward, and these are my disclosure statements. I receive a salary from Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center. I receive royalties from Speech Therapy PD for my work with First Bite Podcast and other presentations. I also receive payment for sales from the First Bite Boutique, which I have with Michelle Dawson. For non-financial disclosures, I am a member of ASHA and a member of Special Interest Group 13. I also am a volunteer for Feeding Matters. I am a contributor for the book Chasing the Swallow with Michelle Dawson, which I receive no financial gain. I also am a member of the South Carolina Coalition Committee with ICDL-DIF full-time.
The views and opinions expressed in today's podcast do not reflect the organizations associated with the speakers and are their views and opinions solely.
Okay. All right, everybody, we are back, and I am in awe of the genuine, radiant joy of today's guest. But, y'all, we have none other than Marsha Dunn Klein joining us today. And she is the guru behind the Get Permission approach. And in truth, she is also one of the most, no pun intended, approachable, kindest, most passionate and endearing women you could meet. So I know that we are a couple of weeks out from the ASHA convention. So I'm hoping that after you listen to her today, you'll make sure to tab your ASHA convention app to come see her invited lecture and part 2 lecture in Seattle. So without further ado, I get the honor of introducing, and she's been on before, yay, but reintroducing Marsha Dunn Klein. So Marsha, hi.
Hi, Michelle. I am so happy to be here again. And I can't tell you what a joy it is for me to be in this podcast space because you are so welcoming. And so thank you for that very, very kind introduction. You know, I love what I do and I've been doing it a long time.
Yeah, but what y'all don't know is we've had numerous conversations about the history of the PFD world before it was called PFD world, like origin backstories and where we are. And I am not overstating this enough or shouting this from the mountaintops enough. Marsha Dunn Klein was one of the fairy godmothers of the world of PEDS dysphagia and PFD before we had the terminology that we have now. And she is also one of the leaders that is moving us forward into the acceptance of neurodiversity affirming, trauma informed care, like all of these buzzwords that you see on the land of Instagram, but you were there before the land of the Instagram, actually elevating and raising autistic and voices that were not being heard. So on multiple levels, you've been a trailblazer. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Well, to be fair, I want to say that there are certainly people, pioneers in my life. So yes, I've been around for 54 years doing this. But, my mentor was Suzanne Evans Morris, as you well know. And I have to shout out to all the other people because we wrote Pre-Feeding Skills early on. 1986 was the first one. And it was based initially then on the work that Suzanne did in her PhD program.
Mm-hmm.
To look at pre-feeding skills. And she looked at the jaw and the cheeks and the tongue. And she had a small group of kids, but it was the first bit of information that came out there. But why I'm even bringing that up now is because that sort of launched an area where there wasn't pediatric feeding before then. And it was, she was a speech pathologist. I was an OT. It wasn't anybody's job in particular. But since then, we've all had to just keep learning. So we learned about cerebral palsy. We learned about development. We learned about medically fragile kiddos, which in the beginning of my career, Michelle, that we weren't saving that many. We just started saving more of the tiniest preemies in the early 70s, right? So we all had to step up to the plate and learn so much more. And we learned more about lactation. We learned more about developmental issues, selective eating, autism. We've learned about oral motor skills and oral anatomy and we've learned more about lungs and hearts. I mean, we've just had to learn so much. So I do feel like, yes, I've been around a long time, and I appreciate that you say that I was a pioneer, but also there are so many people that have influenced my learning, your learning, our learning, that I just never want to lose sight of that. And I think sometimes I see people accidentally being in a bubble of their particular personal learning. And I want to always challenge us to think broader and to continue to learn from so many areas. And I learned that from Suzanne, who had the most amazing library of learning about consciousness and brain's perception and music and so many different areas that weren't just feeding. And so I think by learning broadly, we can be better feeding therapists.
Yes. Yes. That is honestly, if we stick in our own silos, we have failed before we even begin, because there's such an overlap with other professions. But that's why we have to engage in interprofessional education, because we have to know what the other organ systems, what the different sensory systems, how all of these pieces interconnect to then be able to effectively engage in interprofessional practice. And that's a whole different trajectory that honestly, as a society, we're not really taught how to engage in different spheres, and both professionally and personally. We kind of tend to stick to our own little areas. But these babies and these children that we work with, we have to branch out and be comfy cozy in areas that we're not comfy cozy in. So yes.
And you do a lot of teaching, and I do a lot of teaching, and young people don't learn a lot of this in school. And
Yes.
so what I want to say about feeding is that I believe feeding is an advanced practice skill,
Mhm.
because speech therapists, OTs, we don't learn it in school. We learn some.
Mhm.
We learn some. But to be good at feeding, you have to be so eclectic, and there's a certain amount of experience and wisdom that really supports the process, right? And so when I think about feeding in 2024, 2025, in these times, it is so exciting to me. And you say I was around for a lot of years, and I have to say that I look back and I'm not always thrilled with the way I did things earlier on in my life. I've had to grow and change. And you said that I've been, sort of newer in the neurodiversity world. I am embracing the neurodiversity information with both arms and both feet, because I wasn't great at it. I wasn't even the best at it. But so when I started, and so I have so much to learn, but because I have so much to learn, and because I've been learning so much and changing so much, I feel it's important to share that shift with the pediatric crowd, because and be able to say, you know what? I needed to change some things. I
Yes.
needed to be different, and be able to admit when we know more, we can do more.
Yes.
When we know better, we can do better. Thank you, Maya Angelou. One of those areas. So in 2024, we have lots of new brain neuroscience. We know a lot more about neurodiversity. We know a lot more about sensory processing, the depths of sensory processing. We know a lot more about interoception. We know a lot more about coaching and early intervention and empathy. We know a lot more about responsive feeding and internal motivation as an influencing factor. There are so many more. Uh, uh, we know more about connection, relationship, safety. We just know more. So we need to begin to pay attention to those areas in depth, look at the research that's supporting those, and incorporate a lot of those principles into how we prioritize what we do in therapy and why we do it. You know, people have come to us because they want their kids to eat differently,
Mhm.
eat better, more, longer, quicker, less. There's something about the child's feeding that's not working right for that child and parent. So that's
Mhm.
why they come to us. I believe it is our job, number one, to be curious and try to understand, what is it about this situation, this experience for this child. I do this all the time lately, Michelle. This child in this moment, this child in front of us today in this moment. What's going on with this child?
Yes.
Why is this working or not working? And what can I do as a therapist to help validate that child, understand what's going on, be curious, and then make some adjustments so that child can be more successful? And in a world where we've been trying to get kids to eat differently, sometimes we go right to feeding food in your mouth today in this therapy session, but really that child's nervous system may not be ready at that moment in that. And so that our great agenda on our plan that we had for our therapy session, wow, isn't going to work today because the child's
Not ready.
telling us they're not ready.
Yes. So I've got this sweet little booger butt that comes in with his mama and his baby brother. And Mom wants him to eat the foods that the family eats, right? That's typically the goal that they come to us. And this little guy, he's 2 and change, not quite 3 yet. He's got characteristics of autism, but we haven't had the referral process, underlying baseline cardiac conditions, a whole host of known GI components. I mean, the kid's been through the ringer already and hasn't gotten into OT yet. We got the referral, but one of the first things I did on my email was like, so we're going to see my friend, the OT who's right there. But I was like, let's just take it back to being comfortable with the new foods that we see in the house, because to him, the foods he doesn't eat, they're new. And so we have the clinic that I practice at has a fully functional kitchen. Okay, and I don't just mean any kitchen. Suzette, the owner, took her 1910 farmhouse, took her kitchen out of that and put it in the clinic. So when you walk into the clinic, it feels like when you're in the kitchen, like you're in a home, which has, I would love to see a study just on the aesthetics of the place and how that has changed each child's interactions, because it's not sterile. There's warmth there, right? So it looks like a home. But we have little kid-friendly knives, and we have simply started with just cutting foods, cutting things. No pressure to lick it, no pressure to sniff it, just cut it. And then he likes to feed mom. So mom is eating a lot of things that he's cutting. But I was explaining to her that from an interoceptive perspective, I don't think his relationship is still healing internally with himself because of everything that he's gone through. But what I found was that I don't think I do a good job describing interoception, because my analogy is he's learning, like, proprioception is where my skin starts and how I interact with the world, but interoception is how I feel internally. And you used that word when you were describing it, but how do you describe the concept of interoceptive or interoception to caregivers? Like, what analogy do you use for this?
You know, I will say that I think about interoception as how's the child feeling. And that could be I'm hungry, I'm sad, I have pain, I have reflux, and all those kind of things. But it's also how am I feeling comfortable, emotionally, ready to learn. And I would like to just shout out to Kelly Mahler, who's one of my just favorite OTs to learn about interoception from, because she's got, I don't know, I think 11 books and curriculum and trainings. She's just amazing. And so I would head your audience in that direction to learn so much more about interoception. But what I want to say about the experience you just described is that you have decided that it is important for this child to have positive experiences and build positive memories. And I think as therapists, if we try to understand the nervous system better and the newer neuroscience that we're learning, we know that when you have experiences, your brain sets down and experience kind of a pathway, right? This works for me and this doesn't work for me. We
Yes.
know from the work of Stephen Porges, we know of the work of the Shonkoff and Bruce Perry and people in the trauma world. We know that when you have negative experiences,
Mhm.
they wire in a different way and they actually change the way you respond. And so and we know from the newer neuroscience that the work of Dan Siegel, and he talks about the window of tolerance. When children come to us, we want them to be in their window of tolerance. We want them to be in that readiness place, that I'm ready to learn, ready to have a conversation. Michelle, I'm ready to interact with you. And in order to do that, be in that calm window of tolerance, the child can't be worried, can't be needing to protect themselves, can't be. And we know that a lot of our kiddos that have a lot of worry are wired to go into fight flight. So we've met kiddos that sort of get to your therapy session and they already want to leave the parking lot or not come in the door or push the table away or wonder what you've got hiding behind that screen. What kind of food are you going to pop out today? You know, they worry about us because they don't know what to expect. And when children have had negative experiences and lots of worry, and we know this from all that we're learning about neuroscience in these days, when they're wired to be worried, when you're worried, you become hypervigilant. So you're
Yes.
like, if that mountain lion was chasing you, right, you're going to have a higher sense of smell and a more hyper alert sense visually, and more hyper alert touch, and more hyper alert with sound. You're just careful because why? Your
Fear.
nervous system is trying to protect yourself.
Yes.
And when you are not feeling safe, the absolute right reaction is to protect yourself. So here we are saying to kids, just put your hands down. No, don't push the food away. No, just put it in your mouth. Just take 2 bites before this happens. We have an agenda as therapists because we mean well. We meant well. We want to help that family figure out how to get food in that kid's mouth, right? That's what we meant. But in fact, if the child is responding with a pathway that's been wired because of negative memories, that's wired for hyper worry, our first job can no longer be, this is how you get food in your mouth. It needs to be, how can we help you feel safe in this situation? Which, Michelle, is exactly what you did. You didn't say to this child, you need to put it in your mouth. You said, hey, we're just going to be here. You can feed mom. You can cut it up. You're giving the child the experiences that are positive. So you're rebuilding some new memories with food, which is perfect. And you're also being curious and watching him like, which of these foods that we're being curious about are you kind of interested in? Because there might be some the child is willing to interact with a little longer and a little more and show you their curiosity. Because when we go at their pace and let them build that positive memory with their choice, with their internal motivation, oh my gosh, the changes are different than
Yes.
what we used to get when it was our grown-up agenda to make them do things.
Yes. Yes. His face when he cut that tomato and it went splat was like, what just happened? It was the funniest thing in the world. He was good. It was a little cherry tomato. He was good when it was solid, and he licked it when it was solid, and he was curious about it. But when he cut into it and all of the tomato guts, that's what I call them, when the tomato guts went plop, he was like, oh, I'm done. I'm out.
It's so good for you to say, all right, this sweet child in front of me, this child in this moment became dysregulated.
Oh, very much
No
so.
longer was feeling safe in this situation, and good for him to be able to say, yuck, it doesn't work for me. And good for you to be able to go, wow, that was a juicy tomato. And then maybe change the subject, right? Or move it farther from him, or help him figure out what does he need to do to help his body feel safer. And that probably doesn't have anything to do with you're going to get that in your mouth today, right?
No.
So what's happened, I think, in our field is when we had those grand ideas that we wanted to help parents get food in kids' mouths,
Mhm.
first off, we got our roles a little discombobulated. And I think about my role differently today, Michelle, than I used to. So I think it's not our role to get food in kids,
Mhm.
because that's an externally motivated thing. I will make you do it. But for me, Michelle, it would have been in the most loving way. I would have done it sweetly. Nobody was going to cry. I wanted, get permission has always been a kinder, gentler version of therapy, because I was being in contrast with what happened earlier on in my career with a lot of behavioral, more compliance-based kind of things. So I knew
Yes.
it wasn't going in that direction, but I thought I was being good because I was being friendly and playful. And, I was a cheerleader and all those things. So we made that fun. But the fact is that I needed to adjust, because even in my, hey, do you want to lick it? Hey, do you want to kiss it? Hey, do you want to put it in your mouth and spit it out? I was trying to be gentle, because I do know that if you're not willing to smell it, why would you put it in your mouth? If you're not willing to touch it, why would you put it? If you hate the look of it, why would you? All of those things, I know that from a sensory perspective. But I tried to make it so cute that people still interacted with those foods. And to be fair, many kids ate new foods, loved it. Lots of change happened, reinforced me for this way of thinking. And I look back now at a number of kiddos that did amazing things in therapy and went home and didn't do any of that at home. And when I look
Yes.
at kiddos now, what I realized was, even though the parent was there, even though we made it fun, even though we were building positive memories, that kiddo was masking their true interoception and how they truly felt about it. And so when we know about the window of tolerance with Dan Siegel's perception about how we think about readiness, some of our kiddos get hypervigilant, but some of our kiddos get hyporeactive, which they get quiet, feel depressed or shamed. Sometimes they freeze. But more often, we're learning from the neurodiversity community is to talk about masking, and that so many of these kiddos would mask truly what was going on with them. Maybe they were masking their disgust or their fear or their worry in order to please, because they couldn't get away from the situation and they thought that they needed to please their grown-up. And Marsha was being so sweet and so nice, and she looked like she was having fun, so maybe we'll just go along with this. But in fact, they'd get home into their safe environment with their parent and say, no way, not eating that. Yes. And I didn't understand that well for a long time. And that's an area that I want to shout from the ceiling or from the mountaintops, because it's an area where I needed to rethink. So I did this thing where I used to say, you could smell it. And now do you want to put it on your lips? Now do you want to kiss it? Now do you want to give it a little frog lick? Now do you want to? And I had those kinds of things that I would do in the most playful way. And I don't do that anymore. And you and I later on are going to be talking about trying it in a whole podcast. But we're rethinking that. In order to rethink that, I've had to be learning from so many people who've had these experiences. So I'm really making a point to listen to people who have lived experiences. And a lot of autistic adults these days are being able to articulate and tell us, this is what it's been like. If your readers don't know, Meg Farrell, Two Sides of the Spectrum, yes. Her podcast is totally amazing. And also Kelly Mahler is also amazing, but and so many others. But Meg Farrell interviews many, many different voices and people who've had various different lived experiences in this area. And it's when adults can say to us, this didn't work for me when you did this compliance-based thing. This didn't work for me when you made me gag and smell it or eat 3 bits of Brussels sprouts before I actually got my waffles, right? So these voices are powerful, and I am seeking them out. Noreen Hunani does RDs for neurodiversity, and she has a whole course on thinking about neurodiversity and feeding. There are so many voices we're learning from. So that is changing how we do things, absolutely. We have more research than we did earlier on in my career. So much more research about feeding, about safety, about connection, about relationships, and about internal motivation in eating.
My Erin just interviewed a psychologist whose research studies, and forgive me, I don't remember the woman's name, but she's a psychologist who studies caregiver eating disorders and caregiver ARFID and how it's impacting and presenting in pediatrics. And is it a driving force in the child developing a pediatric feeding disorder? So that's, yeah.
I would love to see that article or that study. We do have research that tells us that ARFID that there's a genetic relationship, that there are a lot of this depth of differences in sensory processing can run in families. And also if the caregiver doesn't presents with wiping your face off every time you get messy and with only giving you certain foods because they don't like certain foods, then you only have certain experiences. And so there's certainly both sides. I mean, you and I talk all the time about children and parents both bring their story to the mealtime, right? And so they are influenced that way. I mentioned earlier about roles, and so the role of we therapists have thought it was our job to get food in.
Yes.
This is a very large way where I'm changing my thinking about feeding. It's a big shift for me. I thought it was my role to show the parent how to do it, to get the kid to try new foods and do it gently. And I now think of it as it is not our job to get food in kids. And my really good friend Jenny McLaughlin, a speech pathologist out of Texas, is the one that says that loudly. And she'll say the only get in feeding should be get permission, right? But I believe it is our job instead. It's the child's job to decide what goes in their mouth. They get to have agency over that. They're in charge of their own body, and we can help them understand what's working and not working with their body. We can help them feel validated and accepted about that. It's our job to help parents know how to offer food so that the child can be comfortable and move forward in their learning in a positive way and feel still welcome at the table. And you and I know so many kiddos who come to the table feeling like I've disappointed my parent my whole life.
Yes.
Food makes me gag. They want me to eat it. They make me sit here till I
Clean your
go to
plate.
bed at 10 o'clock and then I didn't eat anyway. And these are not bad parents. I'm not in any way judging these parents. They just want their kids to learn how to eat and learn how to eat more and different things. And from the child's perspective, which is where I want us to be, I want us to be looking at it through the eyes of the child. Then if somebody's making you sit at the table till 10 o'clock at night and you still can't get food in because that's not a food you could eat, that's problematic for that child. And the child learns everybody else comes to the table. Everybody else gets to fill up at mealtime. Everybody else gets to eat enough. But I come here and you're making me eat 3 Brussels sprouts before I get my dinner, and I can't and I won't, and I'm disgusted. I can't. I'm not. And so, what the child begins to learn, and we know so many of these kiddos, is that they have sort of minimized self-esteem and feeling not accepted. And I just say to parents, we want your child to feel loved and included at the table no matter what, and that we get it, sweetheart. We know this is hard. We get it. We know it's hard. And so our job needs to be to give the child opportunities rather than the requirement to eat.
Yes.
We're giving them the opportunity, which is exactly what you did in the study or in the situation you described. You're giving this child the opportunity. You're showing the parent opportunity without pressure. You're showing the parent, I can accept this child for whatever they can eat or not eat today in this moment, and we're going to learn together. And that child can still feel loved and accepted, not like they're coming to therapy to be surprised and disappoint therapists and mom every time. It's a shift. It's a big conscious shift.
Yes. So many thoughts. One, something that I have evolved in as a practitioner over the course of my career is doing a better job of truly seeking to understand baseline. And part of me wonders if it is I know that it comes from a bias of this is how our family eats together, right? So I grew up, everybody had dinner at the dinner table. As a family, we have dinner table nights 4 nights of the week for sure, breakfast almost every morning at the breakfast table. Otherwise, we'll bring out picnic tablecloths and eat as a family on Friday night, Saturday night, watching a movie, right? That is our nuclear family and how we function. And I, for the longest time, only saw the world through that lens, right? Assuming that everybody eats at the dinner table when this isn't the case. And that is something that's so basic that in hindsight, it's like, how did I not see that, right? Like, oi, how did I miss that? But now when I'm doing my evals and I'm talking about interventions and to what you said earlier, pulling in that caregiver coaching piece, if I truly do a smashing job at a routines-based caregiver routines-based interview, then I'll understand what it really looks like when the family eats a meal together. Like, and not every meal is going to look the same, but it's seeking to understand where are those opportunities for exposure in a non-threatening, this is a normal, natural pattern for this family. And I have a couple kids that I'm working with right now where their Their practice, their carryover, their support strategies is simply serving the family when they have dinner table dinners. Some of them have dinner table dinners on Sunday after church with fried chicken. Some of them sit at the dinner table multiple nights a week. But in those opportunities, it's all right, let's practice simply serving your family members. Like put the food on their plate. And we practice doing that, having them put it on our plates. No pressure for them to eat it, but it has shifted my clinical skill set. It's shifted how I write my goals because that's a huge, I'm not asking them to have a bite. I'm asking, hey, I'm writing a goal. Can they serve a caregiver or serve the SLP? And it's so neat to watch them and then the conversations. Mommy, you really like that one. Mommy, I gave you more of this because you like this. But we're doing this at a place of love. But the information, also because I have so many that have language therapy in conjunction with feeding therapy, the amount of language opportunities to help describe the foods and that gives me insight into what it feels like and what's happening in their bodies with these foods. There's so many layers to it, but that's been a fundamental shift in my practice that I've had to walk away from my assumption that everybody eats in a certain way. And again, things that aren't taught, but like you said, we're pulling information from all over.
I want to piggyback on that. That's so important that as a clinician that you've made that change, that you've looked at, because so many of us thought you just have to come to the mealtime. And that's just how it has to be at a family table. And you're right. So many people just eat so differently. And I also want to piggyback on that and say not everybody, the mealtime doesn't work for everybody.
Yes.
And so as we're learning more voices from lived experience, from
Yes.
people who lived the experience, some people will say, when I'm at the table with a bunch of smells, I can't even eat.
Yes.
I have to eat by myself, or I have to have quieter, less things going on. So we also know that as we look at neurodivergent ways of interacting with the mealtime is a highly sensory time. There's
Yes.
stuff going on, there's noises, there's smells, there's visuals, there may be new foods that look different. There's a lot going on, and that works for lots of people. And as a therapist, I love it when kids can be around foods they haven't met yet.
Yeah.
Because they'll never try something new if they don't meet a new food, right? But that's different than be around a food that I want to get you to eat, right? There's a difference in way to think about that. So yes, on the one hand, I do think mealtimes are pretty important to learn about new foods. And at this stage in 2024 and 2025, as we're thinking about the shifting we're making, I also want to add, and mealtimes are not for everybody. So
Yes.
as I listen to voices of people who have lived experience, I have on our Get Permission Institute website, we have 2 new interviews. We're starting a Voices of Lived Experience series. And one of the interviewees is Giannis, and he's a 29-year-old man who's describes himself as autistic and a selective eater his whole life, and he's becoming an OT. So he's got
I love
both
that.
language jargon and a history with feeding and eating. And he says, it's so complicated for me to work during the day. I use a lot of emotion and a lot of it's complicated to be in a world with his sensory processing system. And he gets through it and he does a good job, but it takes a toll. And so he says, a lot of nights I come home from work, there's absolutely no way I want to eat with my parents and my family at dinner. I want to go up to my room, put my 3 favorite videos on, and have my spaghetti or my spaghetti bolognese or my dolmades stuffed grape leaves, the foods that he knows, the comfort foods for him. And it used to be in therapy that, or it still is in some situations, where we focus on compliance. This child is eating by themselves or with their screen on in the corner, and we have to take away the screen and you must come to the table. And we are compliance based in our focus, where really I think that one of the shifting things we're thinking about is who is this child in this moment, and does this mealtime work for this child in this way? So, for example, Michelle, I know a 13-year-old darling young boy who is a highly selective eater, and he has, his 7 or 8 things that he likes that work for him. So he's no longer coming to feeding therapy so that some therapist can say, this is how you lick it, this is how you taste it, this is how you try new food. He's 13. He absolutely knows new food trying strategies, which we've talked about in a lot of different ways. We teach those on foods he knows, right? We teach on the foods he's safe with. We teach him strategies. Now he's got them. What we now talk about every mealtime is, okay, we're having this, so come down to the kitchen. This is what the family's having for dinner. And they do buffet style. So there's always his foods, always plenty of his foods and the family food. So they might be having salmon and Brussels sprouts and salad. And there's also his cereal and 2 kinds of string cheese and an apple that he happens to like, right? So he knows there'll be enough. But he comes to the kitchen and the conversation now each mealtime is, would you like to join us tonight? Or would you like to eat by yourself? And he'll say, Mom, I don't like the smell of that salmon. I'm going to eat in my room. And the family goes, all right, no problem. So what's happened is the child is beginning to, as a 13-year-old, he lives in a world where people eat things he doesn't necessarily eat. So what he needs to learn how to do is advocate for himself. This meal today in this moment works for me. And then there are other days when they have foods that they have breakfast for dinner night sometimes, and everybody's having cereal and pancakes. And that might be one that's easier for him to join in on. But the shift is, instead of, I'm going to get you to try Brussels sprouts, the shift is now, how do you advocate for yourself? Thinking about, how is your sensory system working right now in this moment? How are you feeling? And then validating it, and then helping him make a decision about, what do I need to do about that? Because that's what he has to be able to do when he's 18 and 25 and 40. Right?
Yes.
So sitting there, making him come to feeding therapy, where he would go to feeding therapy in COVID, and there'd be some food on the side of the screen, and people would be trying to help him try new things, and he would just cry. I mean, he just couldn't, right?
Yes.
So, he has a diagnosis of ARFID, and it's hard for him. He has a differently wired sensory processing system. So by forcing him to just go pushing into that, where he's not feeling safe and clearly dysregulated, that wasn't helping, right? So what I now say, and there are people in the neurodiversity world that have been saying, well, forget that mealtime stuff. It doesn't work for our population. And I want to say, wait, I want to be a voice of reason. Mealtimes have lots of advantages. Children can learn about new foods that they haven't known about if we do it in a non-pressured way and we're sensitive to the child that's in front of us at the moment. And you and I, Michelle, meet a lot of kids when they're 1 and 2 and 3, and their nervous systems are changing and they're developing and changing. Many of those kiddos learn to participate in those meal times when they feel safe enough that they know there's foods that are comfortable for them, and they can learn from that environment. And sometimes that mealtime is not the right situation for a child. And we should not ever be saying, everybody needs to go to the table, everybody needs to be compliant, everybody needs to start off in that environment where they're already trying to do fight, flight. They're trying to protect themselves. They're not feeling safe. They're feeling dysregulated. They're not ready because we're putting them in a situation that their body isn't ready for. So that's a big shift for me. And it should be for all of us, I think.
Yes. So just recently, I've started working with more and more ARFID kids. So, which is a new, I've had little ones with ARFID over the years, but they would be like sprinkled in over my caseload. But I have several all of a sudden that are, tween teen young ladies that are neurodivergent or have baseline diagnosis of like high anxiety, those kind of things. And the threat that I've seen is just as you've said, everybody's telling them what to eat, how to eat, when to eat. And one of the young ladies opened up about her home ec class, which I got to be honest, I had completely forgotten about taking home ec. And as soon as she started talking about it, I remembered almost sewing my finger, learning how to use a sewing machine to make a turtle pillow that is upstairs in my attic in a box because I kept that turtle pillow, right? But all I could think about is what an amazing opportunity to learn about food with peers, like through class, if it's done in a loving, safe place, right? Like they're getting that in. And I know home ec class is not a class that's still popular in the country, right? It's just we now live in a very, very rural setting where they also have farm animal husbandry class for 6 weeks. And I didn't know that was a thing. So Goose is really in for it later this year when he has that as his final class for 6th grade. But I started talking to her and watching her light up about the cooking portion. And for this child, her carryover, her strategy is she wants to make a meal for her family. That's her motivator, is she doesn't want to eat it, but she wants to make it. And old Michelle would have put the pressure on that she has to eat part of what she old thought process, but new.
Mhm.
Now I'm like, okay, let's pull out Pinterest. So we literally pick out recipes on Pinterest and discuss, because she's into vlogging and social media, and it's this totally new dynamic of supporting her while she's still getting supports from psychology, psychiatry, her pediatrician, her OT, and then Michelle rolls in with Pinterest and is like, let's pick out some recipes. But it is a shift, a fundamental shift that I don't know if even 3 years ago I would have been able to wrap my brain around it. But that's the joy and giving grace for former ways of practicing and then moving forward. So, yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. And I know so many young people with diagnoses of ARFID that actually take cake decorating classes and become
It's perfect.
little chefs. I know some that's just too far away from where their sensory system is,
Yes.
but I know a number of them. And what I like about that is when you live in a world where lots of people eat differently than you are, it's nice to be able to figure out how to navigate yourself and figure out for you what works in those situations. But Michelle, art therapy in my clinic, my old clinic, but I no longer have it, but we would cook all the time,
Yes.
not to get kids to eat, but to make pancakes for the other people in the clinic, to make a fruit salad to take home for the family, to make fruit shish kebabs to take home, to make the salad. So everybody that comes in the afternoon brings foods and take home things, containers, to take home something. So the child knows they are, if they're comfortable enough. I mean, again, this child in this moment, but they know that in our clinic, we have what we call trust truths. And in our trust truths, one of the top rules is nobody's going to make you eat anything. And you get to, not everybody has to like everything, and you get to decide what goes in your own mouth. So, what the child is learning in our clinic is I can be very comfortable. The kids who are doing this, we can find where their comfort level is with interacting with foods, and help them just be more comfortable in a world of food interactions. For example, a little 13-year-old that I know, I said, hey, you like Nutella sandwiches. What about if you help make Nutella sandwiches, right? Could you make your own? Because your mom doesn't always make them when you're ready for them, right? And you could make your own because you're 13. And he goes, okay. So I was at his house and we got out bread, the same bread he always likes, and the Nutella, the same one he always likes. And the bread was right there. And he could not put his hand in the loaf of bread to bring the bread out.
Sensory overload.
I didn't know that about him. And so you realize if you can't even pick your bread out of the bread bag, your whole level of angst around food is so different. So what we
Yes.
said was, we have to acknowledge, oh, you're not wanting to touch that today. And instead of, let's put it away, I said, what do you think would help you do this? There's tongs, there's gloves, there's these, is one of these things, do you think it would help you? So we taught him to advocate for himself, to what did he need to do to get the bread out of the bread bag. And for
Yes.
3 weeks, he put gloves on and he reached the bread out of the bread bag, made his sandwich, careful not to touch any Nutella on his fingers around the edge of the bread, right? He made his own. 3 weeks into it, one day he forgot to put the gloves on, reached in, got the bread out and said, oh, I touch the bread. And from then on, he could touch the bread, but he did it at his pace, Michelle.
Yes.
And
Yes.
he didn't feel judged. We accepted where he was. We acknowledged where he was. We validated his body. He was processing this differently. We helped him work with us on choices of what would be better for your body. He made the choice. He did that. And when he was ready, he didn't need the gloves.
Mm-hmm.
That's a shift in our thinking.
Mm-hmm. God.
We have lots to learn, huh?
Yes.
And we're still learning it every day.
I know. And then I just go to, but how do we educate colleagues and caregivers in a non-threatening, positive, uplifting way that we can make the shift, right? There's we have lots to do, ma'am. Lots to do.
We do, Michelle, but part of why I want to talk about this is because, I have been around a long time. And so when you've been around a long time doing feeding, people think you know what you're doing and you get it right all the time. And to be able to say, I didn't get it right all the time. I was kind. And I did my best. And now that I know differently, I'm shifting. And so, number one, role modeling that we have to have grace and give ourselves grace and know that we did the best we could because we're in this field because we care and we want to help children and parents. And so I am not saying any of these things by way of blaming. I'm taking ownership that I have been trying to also to change and really shift in the waters myself. I'm going to ASHA this fall and they have invited me and I'm very, very honored to be there. But part of what I'm going to talk about is this topic, that all the ways that we are shifting and can shift. And I've had people, when I've talked about this in the audience, cry to being sort of overwhelmed and sad. Like, oh my gosh, what have I done?
Yes.
And that's not the response I'm trying to elicit. I really want us to think of Maya Angelo's quote about when you know better, do better, right? Do the best you can, but when you know better, do better. So we all have to move forward and change as we find things that we can incorporate in what we're doing that seems to work better with what we know now, with our evidence, with our research, with our experience. And when I took my NDT course in 1980, after 1 week, I sobbed to the instructors. I was in there sobbing. And they said, everybody gets to this point. You're just an overachiever, Marsha. You just got to sobbing, early on. But I thought I didn't look at the body in that way before. And I thought I knew what I was doing. And now I don't know anything. And I had to put myself back together, right? And so I'm always a little bit sad and want to give really big hugs to people that go, yeah, but I'm sad because I just did these things in some wrong way. And I'm saying you did the best you could. You wanted to help. And let's just go forward. That's the best we can do.
Yes.
And give ourselves grace.
I have one family that they're so used to ABA behavioral based approaches because this is what they know. I mean, when you have a family and all of your children have been recipients of or been exposed to that approach, that's what they know, that's what they're comfortable with. And I know American Academy of Pediatrics last year pulled support for ABA, put it all behind floor time, then rescinded their resent and then split their support. That was an interesting week in the world of the news. And I've seen there's a phenomenal ABA practice back in Columbia, South Carolina. The owner of the practice has her PhD and her wife is a speech pathologist. And she always laughed and joked about it. She's like, we have the best pillow talk. I'm like, I'm sure you do. But like her caseloads made huge progress, but she didn't do what I would think of as ABA. It was like floor time, just not called floor time. And it is difficult when you walk in as a practitioner and I want to help and what the family wants and expects versus how I want to shift and change. And there's not tension, but this is what we know and what we're comfortable with. And if you follow this regimented protocol, he'll eventually start doing it. And trying to teach about autonomy and independence and, elevating that neurodiverse voice. That's to meet both caregiver and child where they are. And y'all, I'm not saying I'm doing it right. I'm pretty sure I'm annihilating and butchering the situation, but I'm acknowledging that right now I'm in the hard, especially with this one family, because I'm having to create trust so that we can move towards the shift.
When I think about our roles and that shift for me, it is not our job to get food in, right? Even though the parents think it's our job to get food in, because
Yes.
that may have been the experience that they've had. They're doing the best they can also. So
Yes.
we have to get better and better and better at being able to describe to parents why we're functioning from a different place, from the perspective of, I think empathy is a whole area that we need to continue to investigate. But we want to understand this child in this moment. We want to understand this parent in this moment, but we also want to focus on how can we help the parent understand their child's experience, help the parent have empathy for their child. And 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 to say, I don't do therapy in this way because I want your child to feel loved and accepted and not feel pressure. What we know about the nervous system is that pressure doesn't help. What we know about, and to give as much of that information as possible. And Michelle, there have been some families that I have worked with where I've said, you are feeling frustrated each time you come because I'm not doing what you want. I'm not doing an
Mhm.
ABA approach. I'm not focusing on compliance. I don't want to be your compliance technician. The
Mhm.
way I see this is different, and I want to help you with it. I want to help your child with it. I want to help you and your child have enjoyable meals at home. And I can't do it that way. That's
Yes.
not what I believe in. So I might not be the right person for you.
Yes.
And so, if you want to take a break and go somewhere else, please, I support you in that. You need to do what you need to do. And I'm keeping the door open because you are always welcome back. And
Yes.
I trust that you need to do what you need to do for your family. And so I've had so many families that have gone away for a month and come back and go, oh, okay, now I get it. And so I want to give people the love that says, I may not be your person. And that's okay. There's plenty of kids out there and families that I can help. But 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 also help them think through that process about why this approach that you and I are talking about, Michelle, is the foundation is acceptance and love.
Yes. So what we're talking, it's attunement and attachment. And everybody thinks of attunement and attachment in infancy, right? Like the studies of like up to a year old, like God, those awful videos where the child's desperately trying to get the mom's attention and the mom's looking over here on screen. And then the child does something. And then all I could think of is how are we screwing those kids up that are sitting in those studies? But like the, the scary voice in the back of my mind thinks that every time I watch those, but that's a huge chunk of what we do with even older children is teaching attunement and attachment as a parent and a child, but they could be 6, they could be 7. I mean, I Bear has big emotions. My bear, he's 9. We're almost 10, and he will always be my big emotion child. And there's days where, as a mom, I am exhausted because I've carried big emotions for my patients all day. I mean, and I call it third shift. So as a mom, I have the first shift to get everybody fed, lunch is packed, out the door. Second shift is my job. And then third shift is coming home and lunch is unpacked, dinner prepared, going through homework and all of that. And there's moments where I know that I need to work on my attunement and attachment, but I am also emotionally drained from having poured in all day long, right? That's y'all, if you're a mom, this is okay to admit. I had one mom tell me I'm over being touched, and I'm like, oh, honey, I feel that. But Aaron has pointed out to me with love and tenderness, hey, you missed that cue from Bear when like she's in town visiting, and I'm like, oh my God, I didn't even see it. She's like, no. She's like, you're over here doing this with your brain. She was like, but I thought it would be helpful if you heard it. She's really good at identifying attunement and attachment and has made us better.
You know, the when I think about attunement, attachment, and connection,
Yes.
the connection that's important, what are we doing when the parents are the connected people for these kiddos? They're the ones that can
Yes.
help them regulate, co-regulate, and we're sending the parent into the waiting room while we go, try to fix their kiddo in therapy all by themselves.
That parent
We
needs to be there.
parents need to be a part of it in order to learn how to do this, right?
Yes.
So here's one more example, and a clinician that I know said to me, a family wants to bring hard-boiled eggs and try them with their kid.
Okay.
And and I told the mom, there's just no way this child's going to eat it. Was a particularly picky eater with a particularly narrow, selective group of foods, right? And so the clinician said, I don't think that hard-boiled egg is a good idea. And I said, well, another way to think about that is the parent wanted to try hard-boiled eggs. So, what would happen if the parent brought hard-boiled eggs? So, you could interact with the hard-boiled eggs in a way that role models when it goes well and when it doesn't go well, because that's the thing the parent needs to know. Not that she got the hard-boiled egg in the kid that day, but what could you do with a hard-boiled egg? You could roll it back and forth, you could cut it, you could bounce it, you could do it as a soccer ball, you could peel it, you could feel it. How does it feel with the skin on it? How does it feel with the shell off? You could cut it. And so in the session, when they cut it, the child was like, "Oh my God, that's a big smell." Woo! And the child really reacted as if this was too much. Then what you could do with that parent and that child is validate the child's response. That
Yes.
is the child's response, not negate it, but oh, that is a response.
Yes.
Notice it. And then, huh, that was a big reaction. There's something wrong with that today, huh? What do we need to do about that? Do we need to move it away? Shall I move it away? Do you want to move away? Do you want to move it away with tongs? Do you want mom to? You can have a conversation about this was your body's reaction and what could we do about it? That is brilliant role modeling with the
Yes.
parent, because the parent just learned when I offer a food and it didn't work right or as I expected, what could I do about it in the moment? And
Yes.
the goal wasn't you need to eat that hard boiled egg. Because who cares? If they ate a hard boiled egg bite in therapy, they may never do it again at home. Maybe they'll like it, maybe not. But that's not the big picture. The big picture is, does the parent know how to offer and adjust? Does the child know how to react authentically with what their body's doing without masking it? And can the child participate in the discussion about what do we need to do about it?
Yes.
That is important therapy. Not that the child ate or didn't eat that hard boiled egg. So that
Yes.
was a different way of thinking about that story, because the goal was teaching the parent to be able to offer and adapt at home. That's more important than they ate for us in therapy. And that's a
Yes.
big for a lot of people.
Yes. But as a parent, to be empowered with that information, that is, y'all, you might be the smartest person in the room and you might have the best therapy sessions. But if you're not equipping that caregiver for the rest of the week and how to handle the big emotions, the reactions, the experiences as part of their daily routines, we have failed before we have started. And that's I I love watching the moments click for the caregivers. As a mom, I love when it's presented to me in a safe space so that I can say, oh, I see it. I get it. Then I am empowered to see my children set for success. And that's what
Mhm.
we do at the end of the day. And I love having you on. Y'all, this is a mini series takeover with Marsha. So this is part 1 of 4. And so she's going to come back for several more iterations to kind of carry this conversation forward, because we knew it was impossible to get everything in. I mean, still 4 is not, we're not going to get it all in, but we wanted to create safe spaces for learning. So can you tell us what to expect in the next 3 episodes?
Michelle, we talked about really thinking about shifting the way we think about trying it because we all are wanting kids to try foods. And to do that, we have to take kind of a deeper dive into the sensory systems in a little bit of a different lens than we traditionally have. So we're going to talk about trying it. We're going to talk about disgust, the
It's a real
uniqueness of each.
reflex.
Yes, the uniqueness of each of our sort of neurodivergent systems, right? We're going to spend another time talking about nourishing the whole child and sort of nourishing beyond food.
Mhm.
And then our last episode, we're going to talk about sort of the evolution of feeding therapy and how did we get to this point. And this is going to be through the lens of my eyes. And so I'm looking forward to it. We have so much to talk about.
Yes. And folks, y'all, and in full disclosure, I was topic chair for ASHA this year for the Pediatric Feeding and Swallowing Disorders Committee. But as a committee, we worked to select and invite members in our PFD world to come and do invited talks that we're going to elevate, because that's the theme for ASHA this year is elevate, that we're going to elevate our knowledge and skill set. And so the committee voted and requested to have Marsha Dunn Klein come as one of the invited speakers. And then she was gracious enough to put in a call for papers for a part 2 that got voted and approved upon by a council of our peers that were part of the committee. So she's going to do an invited part 1 and a call for papers part 2. And you're speaking on Thursday in Seattle. And I think I can't remember now if that's December 2nd. Hold on
Maybe
one
the
second.
5th.
The 5th. Yes, it's December 5th. And so Thursday morning, your first lecture, I believe, is at 8. And
It
then
is.
bright and early, she's kicking us off strong, y'all. Kicking us off strong. And then we have a break, and then you come back immediately after the break for part 2. So it's room for everybody to hit the head, use the loo, pump, because there's lactation rooms at ASHA now. I love this. So bring your boobies, bring your bottles, bring your babies, and come geek out. Yay.
So I'm doing one long talk, but there's going to be a half an hour break in between, and it'll be a theme, and it'll be about shifting the way we think. And that I've co-founded the Get Permission Institute with Stephanie Cohen and Karen Dilfer, and I'm putting a lot of energy into really thinking about these ways we're shifting our thinking, and we're shifting our thinking about neurodiversity and the voices of neurodivergent adults who are explaining about their experiences. We're listening to parents that are talking about their experiences in feeding therapy. We're having invited speakers talking about internal motivation and external motivation. That would be Heidi Moreland and Jenny Berry. We are celebrating that we all have so much to learn from so many places. And so if you would like more about some of these topics, that might be another place you could also find some information.
Yes. Ma'am, thank you. Truly. For today, for all of it, for just being you. So thank you.
So much fun, and thank you for all you do to make these kinds of podcasts available for people. Michelle, when you're talking about your in the morning you do breakfast, then there's school and you do work, and then you do the lunch unpacking and dinner, and I'm thinking, oh, there's a level 4. That's the middle of the night when you're on 17 boards and doing all this volunteer work. So I don't know where you find all the time. Thanks for all you do.
Thank you. Yes. All right, folks, take a peek at Get Permission Approach on Instagram. Follow us on First Bite Podcast on Instagram. And if you got a little bit of extra love money, may I encourage you to make a donation to Feeding Matters. Their donations go far and wide to get scholarships for patients and children to get like second opinions. That would be spectacular. So everybody, thank you for joining us, and we will be back next week.
See you next time.
Thank you for joining us for today's course. To complete the course, you must log into your account and complete the quiz and the survey. If you have indicated that you are part of the ASHA registry and entered both your ASHA number and a complete mailing address in your account profile prior to course completion, we will submit earned CEUs to ASHA. Please allow 1 to 2 months from the completion date for your CEUs to reflect on your ASHA transcript. Please note that if this information is missing, we cannot submit to ASHA on your behalf. Thanks again for joining us. We hope to see you next time.
Feeding Matters guides system-wide changes by uniting caregivers, professionals, and community partners under the Pediatric Feeding Disorder Alliance. So what is this alliance? The Alliance is an open access collaborative community focused on achieving strategic goals within 3 focus areas: education, advocacy, and research. So who is the Alliance? It's you. The Alliance is open to any person passionate about improving care for children with a pediatric feeding disorder. To date, 187 professionals, caregivers, and partners have joined the Alliance. You can join today by visiting the Feeding Matters website at www.feedingmatters.org. Click on PFD Alliance tab and sign up today. Change is possible when we work together. That's a wrap, folks. Once again, thank you for listening to First Bite, fed, fun, and functional. I'm your humble but yet sassy host, Michelle Dawson, the All Things Peds SLP. This podcast is part of a course offered for continuing education through speechtherapypd.com. Please check out the website if you'd like to learn more about CEU opportunities for this episode, as well as the ones that are archived. And as always, remember, feed your mind, feed your soul, be kind, and feed those babies.